Hey, what's up? I saw the press conference earlier on Monday in which Tony La Russa has decided to step down as manager for the Chicago White Sox. Well, Tony will always have a special place in my heart. Maybe not for this iteration of the Chicago White Sox, but he was the first manager I recognized as a kid. As a lifelong White Sox fan and Southsider, I remember the White Sox growing up and watching that American League Western Division champion White Sox team back in 1983 win the division, and Tony was the manager. His first job as a manager was with the White Sox, so I'll always remember him. He went on to have great success with the St. Louis Cardinals and the Oakland A's. And so now here we are with LaRussa 2.0, and now LaRussa is going to step away because of medical conditions that he's suffering with right now. And so it's interesting about LaRussa is because when he's with the St. Louis Cardinals and the Oakland A's, he was presiding over a couple teams that were not ready to win. And he was part of that rebuilding process to make the A's and the Cardinals winners. And with this White Sox team this time around, this White Sox team was ready to win. This White Sox team over the next 3 or 4 years should win the World Series, and Tony was hoping he'd be part of that. And that's only based on the roster composition, based on the amount of moves that were made by the White Sox. You kind of thought maybe this is going to be the time for the Sox to be either a perennial playoff team, or B, eventually a World Series team with this group. And the LaRussa that I remember from the Cardinals, hell, the LaRussa I remember as a kid with the White Sox had a lot more fire and was really into the games. And this time around, Tony, because of his absence, 10 plus years away from the game, just didn't have it. Just didn't have it as a manager. Doesn't mean that he doesn't know the game, but he was highly criticized for not knowing simple rules. I'll never forget having Liam Hendriks run the bases in his first year with the team in extra innings. And instead of putting a pinch runner out there, putting Hendriks out there to pinch run. I just remember a lot of weird things that he would do as a manager that was unconventional. I don't mind unconventional as long as you win. And the Sox won, but only up to a certain point. And therein lies the problem with the White Sox. Again, this is no shade at Tony La Russa. La Russa did the right thing to take care of his health first. We were hearing stories all throughout this season that there were issues with Tony before he actually stepped away as far as his health was concerned. So, as I mentioned, I always have a spot in my heart for Tony because that the first championship I saw on the South Side, he was the manager for. It just didn't work out. Jerry Reinsdorf wanted to bring his friend back into the fold and said, you know what we need? We need something better than Rick Renteria. We just need a little seasoning, a little polish, and this is what you could bring as a Hall of Fame manager. It didn't work out. And so now you turn the page on Tony La Russa. And so now who's the next manager for the White Sox? I have a handful of names, not in any particular order. Bruce Bochy, who probably should be known as one of the better managers that's not managing right now with Hall of Fame credentials. Freddie Gonzalez is a name that comes to mind. There's a few other names that I have not managed that could get an opportunity for this. But I really believe that when I look at this White Sox job, you still have a core that can win. You still have a core that can be able to get into the playoffs. But it's really not about the manager. It's about the general manager. And it's about Kenny Williams. And it's about Jerry Reinsdorf. They have to make some hard decisions here in the offseason. Whoever the manager is, I mean, you got to have someone to be able to set a culture. I understand that. But at the same time, though, if you are not making the hard decisions, looking really closely at your roster and saying, you know, this guy might be a fan favorite, but we got to move him. Or this pitcher, Giolito or whomever, is on this roster and people like him, but you know what? We've got to upgrade. And so the Sox have to take a good look at this roster. And there's going to be some people that I like. There's a lot of people on this roster that Sox fans like as well that may not be here for the next season. And I'm okay with that as long as those changes make the White Sox a real contender for the World Series championship. This window is open, but it closed on their fingers quickly, didn't it? This offseason here, is going to be crucial for Rick Hahn, if he's still around, by the way, as a general manager. I know that Rick can be very verbose and talk about all the things that he hasn't done. And, he really falls on his sword a lot about things that the White Sox don't do. But I don't want to hear the excuses. I just don't. I don't want to hear the excuses. What I want to see is results. And it's not about holding your cards at the trading deadline and saying, well, we tried very hard to try to upgrade this team, but we did not get any responses. All they cared about, the White Sox, is to try to get healthy and then try to run this thing through the second half and try to win. If you really want to upgrade this team at the All-Star break, the Sox should have made the difficult decisions. Look at this roster and say, hey, maybe for once find a real right fielder. Hey, maybe for once find a second baseman. Hey, why don't you get some of these DHs off the field? A DH in right, a DH in left, a DH at first base, a DH behind the plate in Grandal. You've got to upgrade if you really want to be a serious contender. And so, hats off to Tony La Russa. I'm sure that he won't be managing again. And I understand why Jerry Reinsdorf decided to bring Tony in, because he thought he was getting the Tony from 10 or 15 years ago that could set the culture, that could be fundamentally sound, so the mistakes would not be there. And we got the hands-off Tony. We got the modern manager Tony that allows things to happen, and it just didn't work. So, again, whoever the manager is, you can post below who you think the manager should be for the White Sox. It ultimately, guys, does not matter. If you do not have enough talent from a pitching standpoint, from a hitting standpoint, where this team is not in a rut, if you don't try to make some real change, not wholesale changes, not across the board, but a few spots on the diamond, that seems obvious to me, behind the plate, third base, second base, right field, left field, maybe center field. You got to figure out what you want to be as an organization. Are you going to be a pretender or a serious contender with this group to be a World Series champion? Go Sox? Yeah, 1, 2, 3 gone to Cancun, because they won't be in the playoffs this year.